Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about shielding your electronics, and I'm going to tell you why it's important, but more importantly, I'm going to show you how you can do a professional shielding job using some simple household items that you already have. I'm Dan, this is Guns and Guitars, let's get started. Okay, now before we get started, I want to talk to you a little bit about why shielding your guitar is so important. Those of you who play regularly on single coil pickups, you guys are no stranger to RF interference. Now, whether you're aware of it or not, we are constantly surrounded by RF interference. It's just the day and age that we live in with all the different technology and stuff. RF stands for radio frequency, and RF interference isn't necessarily just generated by radios. Although radios are some of the biggest culprits, just about every electronic device known to man emits some sort of radio frequency interference. For example, your Wi-Fi router in your home operates on the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum or the 5 gigahertz spectrum. Your cell phone operates on like the 700 megahertz spectrum or somewhere thereabouts. What those radio frequencies are actually sound waves. The reason why we're not constantly being annoyed by them is simply because those frequencies operate outside the threshold of our human hearing. The threshold of our human hearing can roughly only pick up between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz or 20 kilohertz. Some of you older rockers, like myself, it's probably more like 14, 15 kilohertz. So when you have your Wi-Fi router operating on 2.4 gigahertz, that's way outside the realm of our human hearing. Now, in addition to those subsonic frequencies that we can't hear, there are some RF frequencies that do manifest through our guitars as frequencies that we can hear, such as the very common 60 cycle hum. And that hum comes generally from appliances. So the biggest culprits being like older dimmer packs, like in older theaters. If you play any gigs in an older theater, anytime they're dimming the lights up, you'll hear this kind of come through your gear. And then if you play any gigs in like a warehouse style venue, fluorescent lighting can cause a very constant, very annoying 60 cycle hum. But really, I mean, your refrigerator, an electronic cash register, just about anything can really contribute to that RF interference. And when our guitars pick it up and send it through the hot signal of our amp, then our speakers then turn that radio frequency into our audible frequency that we can hear. So what we want to do with shielding to prevent that from happening is essentially cover our electronics with some kind of conductive material that will absorb those frequencies. And then more importantly, we want to make sure that that conductive material is grounded really well so that all those frequencies are then bleeded to the ground connection as opposed to our pickup's hot output. That way, those frequencies, while they still exist and they are still passing through the ground, we're never actually going to hear them because they're not coming through our hot connection. Now, obviously, the most effective way to do this would be to stand in a metal enclosure, ground our guitar electronics to the metal enclosure, and just be completely encased. But as you know, that's not very practical, and we're not going to do that. So instead, we're going to use something called a Faraday cage, which was invented by Michael Faraday back in the 1800s. But what he found out is that if you just cover stuff with a conductive net, that it will actually draw in and absorb those frequencies almost as well as if it was completely covered with solid material. And because of Michael Faraday's research, when guitar manufacturers started manufacturing electric guitars, they started to use his theory to create its own Faraday cage. And I'm gonna talk to you about that real quick. So what they started doing is they started connecting the ground network of the guitar pickups to the bridge. And then the bridge is obviously made out of metal, it's conductive, it transfers it to the strings, the tuner, the tremolo, the trem bar. Anything that's metal that's touching now becomes a part of that cage. Okay, so what we now have are these strings are now covering our pickups. They're absorbing that RF interference and bleeding it off to ground so that we don't have to hear them. Now, the Faraday cage in and of itself is extremely effective, especially for humbucker pickups, which were actually developed to combat that hum, which is why they were named humbuckers. But no system is 100% efficient, so it's still necessary, even with humbucker pickups, to at least ground at the bridge so that you have your strings and your tuners and everything as part of your Faraday cage. But with single coil pickups, that's not necessarily the case. While the Faraday cage helps quite a bit, what we need to do is actually expand that cage to completely surround our electronics just as much as possible to absorb as much of that RF interference as possible to bleed it off to the ground. Now, P90 pickups, for whatever reason, seem to be extra susceptible to RF interference. So as I'm building this P90 Jazzmaster kit that I got from thefretwire.com, and if you're interested in building a kit, click the link in the description. You can also use coupon code Guns and Guitars to save $10 on any kit purchase at the Fretwire. So for my P90 Jazzmaster kit that I'm building, I really wanted to make sure that I got some really strong shielding inside the electronics cavities. Now there's a number of ways that you can shield your electronic cavities, but most of them are pretty difficult and pretty expensive. The best method is to use a conductive paint that you can buy from StewMac or any one of those, guitar luthier shops. That conductive paint works really well and you just paint it right in there, but it's pretty expensive. The other way is to use, they have copper foil tape with an adhesive backing and you stick it down into your cavity. The problem is that the adhesive that they use on that is actually not conductive. So as you're overlapping your pieces of foil, you may not necessarily actually be getting continuity between all of your different pieces in there. So what you then have to do is go back and solder or weld all those strips of tape together to get full continuity. Now for my hack, I like to use just regular heavy-duty aluminum foil. Now obviously there's no adhesive on this, so we do need to stick it together with something. And so for that, I use this 3M spray adhesive. Now this is not being advertised as conductive, but I've had excellent results, as I'll demonstrate for you. As long as you spray a really light coat, it seems to transmit continuity no problem. So basically what we're doing here is we're going to cover the inside of the pickguard with aluminum foil. We're also going to do the same thing for inside the electronics cavity with as much as we possibly can. The best method that I've found to do this is just to place your pickguard on some aluminum foil, trace it out, and then when you're cutting, make sure you're cutting inside the line so you don't have any that's going to hang out over the edges of your pickguard. As you can see here, I'm also cutting it down the middle just to make it a little bit easier to work with, while having longer strips of aluminum will help with continuity. It's sometimes just easier to do multiple pieces instead of one big piece. So then we're lightly going to spray our pieces and then place them down on top of the pickguard. As you can see, I'm putting down this little piece right here to connect the two pieces. I just want to make sure that we have really good contact so we can get full continuity on both sides of this pickguard. So next, now we're going to check for continuity, and for this you need a voltmeter, and you just set it to your continuity setting, and hopefully your voltmeter has some kind of really positive feedback when you get continuity, like a beep or a light that comes on. If not, you'll at least need to be watching for the numbers to change as you make connections. So then we're just going to test at a bunch of different points across the pickguard. We're getting continuity, so we're good there. So that is really fast and easy and painless, but obviously the electronics cavity inside our guitar is a little bit more complex, so this is how I do it. So basically what I'll do is I'll just cut smaller shapes of aluminum foil and place them around the pickup cavity and kind of bend them and meld them to fit the inside of the cavity the way I want to. So then what I'll do is one at a time, I'll take those little pieces outside, a quick light spray of spray adhesive, bring it back in and stick it down, just one piece at a time, like I'm putting together a puzzle. Now you'll notice when I'm all done that I've actually overlapped onto the body in 4 different areas. Now, probably one good contact area is all you need, but just to ensure extra continuity between the pickguard and the body, I've put 4 areas where that foil is going to touch the foil on the pickguard when I place it down. And so what that's going to do is we're now going to get continuity between the inside of our cavity and the inside of our pickguard. Now you'll notice too that I did leave some space unshielded where the pickups install with their screws. And the reason why I do this is, while it's not entirely necessary all the time, I've had issues where my pickup screws will actually send some of the hot signal through the screw. And so then if it's touching the shield, then that hot signal is going to get bled to ground and you're not going to get any audio coming through. And this especially happens if you happen to reverse the polarity of one of your pickups to make it in phase with the other one. Then, for whatever reason, the screw that was now touching something that was grounded might be touching something that's hot and cause those frequencies to bleed the ground, and then your pickup's not going to work at all. So, just to steer clear of that entirely, I usually just leave a nice big bare gap right there where the screw would touch the inside of the cavity. And once it's all in together, of course we want to check for continuity. So as you can see, I'm getting good continuity all the way across every piece inside this cavity, so no issues there. Now to connect our ground wires to our shielding to make our aluminum foil into an actual shield, typically what you do when you're wiring your guitar electronics is that you would actually ground the outside of your switch casings and your pot casings. So again, it's that Faraday cage idea. If you ground the casing of your pot and your switch, then your pot and your switch is now shielded from that RF interference. So we ground those and then we stick them into our pickguard. And when we stick them into our pick guard, they're gonna make contact with that aluminum foil. Then when you screw the pick guard down onto your body, that aluminum foil is gonna come in contact with these extra points that we created, thereby creating continuity in our entire cavity. Now, one thing that I sometimes do that's not really necessary, but just another step that you can take to ensure perfect continuity, is instead of wiring just one wire from your pot casing to your bridge ground connection, you actually do 2 wires. So one coming from the bridge, one coming from the pot casing. Then I actually twist them together, wrap them around a screw, and then screw that wire down into the shielding. And then just for extra security, I'll solder those wires to the screw and to the aluminum foil. Again, that's not really necessary. It's actually probably overkill, but it's free and it doesn't take much time, so why not? So you combine all that shielding with a solid ground connection that then goes through your strings and your tremolo and your tuners, and you have a much bigger, more thoroughly surrounded electronics cavity. Now, a common myth about shielding is that you can use it to negate all of your 60 cycle hum, and that's actually just not true. There's no way to get rid of all of it. Even humbuckers are going to struggle with it in rooms that are really bad, but it does help a ton. I mean, you could probably kill 90 to 95% of it at least by doing a really good grounding and shielding job. If you need to get rid of it entirely, you're gonna need to get an active hum canceller, which they sell. They're kind of expensive, but they plug into your wall unit and they do some kind of magic that I don't even understand, and it will completely kill all of your hum. Those are good things to have if you regularly play in those like really noisy venues. But for our intents and purposes, this is going to do a really solid job. Now, another myth about shielding is that people say that it affects your tone, and that's actually not true. But the theory is that your pickups operate in a magnetic field, so when you surround that magnetic field with more metal, then it's gonna affect the magnetic field and therefore affect your tone. And what they say is that it dulls it, especially up in like the upper register and harmonics and things like that. But that's simply not true, because aluminum is not a magnetic material. If you try to stick a magnet to aluminum, it doesn't stick. So this isn't gonna disrupt the magnetic field of your pickups at all, so you really don't have to worry about that. So that's it, guys. Again, thank you so much for watching, and subscribe if you wanna see more tips, tricks, and hacks for guitar or gun building. Also, stay tuned if you wanna see how this Jazzmaster build turns out. I'm gonna be uploading the full build video soon, and as always, there's always a few tricks under the hood, so stay tuned for that. I'm Dan, this is Guns and Guitars. Thanks for watching.